I was only looking for a tax document. That was it. Just one paper buried somewhere in the chaos of our shared office computer, which, until that day, I had barely touched in months. My husband was the organized one, always had been. Every bill, every statement, every login neatly tucked away in folders labeled with absurd specificity. 2020 utilities, insurance claims Jan, Mar, household budget, archived. He made spreadsheets for grocery lists. He color-coded our calendar. He even labeled our Wi-Fi password file, Internet Credentials, Private Do Not Delete. So when I saw a folder named fp.contif docs at the bottom of the drive barely visible, as if shoved there hastily, I paused. It wasn't the name that unsettled me. It was the tone. My husband never used abbreviations. He hated them. I clicked. Inside were 7 files. Not PDFs, not scans. Each file was named like a chapter. Asset transfer timeline. Safe contacts only. Q4 movements. Hong Kong. Emergency narrative draft. Withdrawal coordination. Joint statements. Prep. And one that simply said, if found, read me. My breath hitched. I opened the last one first. It was a plain .text file, no formatting, no header. Just a single sentence in bold capital letters. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. My hands went cold. Gone, as in physically gone, dead, vanished. The file didn't say more. No explanation, no sign-off. I tried to open the others, but 3 of them were password protected. The remaining ones, well, let's just say they weren't about taxes, or groceries, or anything a regular husband with a regular wife should be. That moment, that breathless, frozen, gut-sinking moment was when the cracks in my reality began to widen. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just a wife looking for a tax form. I was a woman on the edge of a revelation that would destroy the very idea of the man I had loved for 9 years. I closed the folder. I stared at the screen, and I knew I was never supposed to see this. For nearly a decade, our marriage was what most would call normal, maybe even enviable to some. We met in college, fell into a routine of mutual respect and shared dreams. Nothing flashy, nothing scandalous. Just 2 people building a life that seemed steady and secure. He was the calm anchor in my stormy world, always ready with a reassuring word or a quick joke to lighten the mood. He worked long hours in finance, a job that paid well enough to cover our mortgage and the little luxuries we allowed ourselves. He had a reputation among his colleagues as reliable, trustworthy, and ethical. I took pride in that. I trusted him completely. Our home was modest but cozy. The garden flourished under his careful hands, the kitchen smelled of Sunday dinners, and the walls held pictures of vacations we dreamed of taking once the kids were older. He wasn't perfect, who is? There were the usual disagreements over bills, the occasional forgotten anniversary, and the endless debates about paint colors for the living room. But none of that ever felt threatening. It was just life. Even his late nights and weekend trips seemed reasonable. Work stuff, he'd say with a tired smile. You know how it gets. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I remember thinking once that our love was the kind that could weather anything. The kind that didn't need constant reassurance because it was built on years of shared memories and quiet moments. Yet beneath that calm surface, something was already shifting, quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first, the signs were subtle, small enough that I convinced myself they were nothing, just the byproducts of a busy life. He started coming home later than usual. Not every day, but often enough to notice. I'd ask where he'd been, and he'd flash that same tired smile, say, long meeting, or a client emergency, and I'd nod, trusting. His phone became a fortress of secrets. Passwords changed frequently. He'd take calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones just out of earshot. When I tried to peek at messages, he'd quickly swipe away or hand me the phone with a casual, nothing to worry about. There were nights when he'd be gone for hours without explanation, and I found myself sitting alone, scrolling through social media, searching for answers I wasn't ready to face. He guarded his emails and accounts like they were top-secret government files. I remember once asking to borrow his laptop, He refused outright. That was new. The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the heavier the doubt grew. But I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was stress. Maybe I was being paranoid. Friends and family reassured me. You know how it is, they said. Sometimes men need space. Their voices mingled with my own fears and hopes, making the truth harder to see. Then came the bills. Late fees on our credit cards, mysterious charges I couldn't explain. I chalked it up to forgetfulness or clerical errors. But the weight of unease pressed harder. Looking back, I realize I ignored too many signs. I was clinging to the image of the husband I thought I had, rather than the man he was becoming. I still remember the exact moment I decided to confront the truth head-on. The folder I had stumbled upon was no longer just a mystery. It was a puzzle I was determined to solve, piece by painful piece. With trembling hands, I began opening the files one by one. The first was titled, Asset Transfer Timeline. It was a spreadsheet filled with dates and numbers, columns of transactions I didn't understand at first glance. But as I scanned through it, my heart sank. Money was moving. Not just a little, it was vast sums, flowing out of our joint accounts into accounts I had never heard of. Destinations labeled with cryptic codes and foreign banks I couldn't locate on any map I checked. The next file, Safe Contacts Only, was a list of names and email addresses, most of which I didn't recognize. Some were coded aliases, others initials. Each contact seemed linked to one of those mysterious transactions, a secret network. Then came Q4 Movements, Hong Kong. I paused, my breath catching. It detailed movements of funds traced to Hong Kong, known for its complex financial regulations, a common hideout for illicit money. The emergency narrative draft was even more chilling, a written document outlining contingency plans, instructions on how to cover tracks if investigations were triggered. It was like reading a criminal's playbook. I tried opening the files titled Withdrawal Coordination and Joint Statements Prep, but they were password protected. I wasn't sure if that was a relief or another torment. But the most haunting was the message in If Found, Read Me, a cryptic warning that now felt like a confession of guilt, or perhaps a farewell. Each file chipped away at the facade of the life I thought I knew. The man who had been my partner, my confidant, was involved in something vast, something dark, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I felt betrayed beyond words. But worse was the creeping realization. This wasn't just his secret, it was ours. Among the files was a folder of photographs, pictures taken in secret, snapshots of meetings, exchanged handshakes, and faces I didn't recognize at first. But one photo stopped me cold. It was a clear, well-lit portrait of a woman standing confidently in an office that I later identified as one of the organization's front locations. The woman's eyes locked onto the camera with a calm but unyielding stare. The shock hit me like a blow. I knew her, not from the usual social circles or family gatherings, but from years ago, an old colleague from a job I once held before we married. Someone I had trusted, shared lunch breaks and coffee conversations with. Someone who had been a friend, in a time when life felt simpler. I scoured through the other photos and documents. Her name appeared in emails, sometimes addressed formally, other times just initials or code names. She was more than a bystander, she was deeply involved. The realization twisted my stomach. Was she part of the web my husband had spun? Was this betrayal bigger than I ever imagined? My mind raced with questions. Doubt gnawed at every memory we shared. Had I ever truly known him? Had I ever truly known my friends? Panic started to claw its way through my composure. The betrayal was no longer personal, it was systemic, tangled in a network that reached far beyond our marriage. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies, faces once familiar now masked by deception. The moment I realized I was no longer the woman my husband thought he knew, I understood something vital. I had to stop being a victim. For years, I had played the part of the trusting wife, the silent partner in his life. But now, with the weight of his secrets crushing me, I became something else, a force quietly gathering strength beneath the surface. I began methodically collecting evidence. Every suspicious email, every unexplained transaction, every coded message was carefully documented. I met with a lawyer I barely trusted, A woman who told me in no uncertain terms that my name being tied to those accounts could mean serious legal trouble. I changed our bank passwords, set up alerts on all accounts, and started monitoring his communications covertly. I hired a private investigator who confirmed that my husband had been weaving a web of deceit far beyond what I imagined. Late at night, I recorded phone calls, hid cameras in places I thought he wouldn't look, piecing together the puzzle that was his double life. I stopped pretending. I stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. In a strange way, I felt liberated, even though the truth was more painful than I ever anticipated. I was becoming someone he didn't recognize, the woman who would no longer be manipulated or silenced. And with every step I took, I edged closer to the moment of reckoning. That morning, silence hung heavy in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. I had spent countless nights wrestling with the storm inside me, weighing the unbearable pain against the hope of salvation, but the scales had finally tipped. The truth was undeniable, and the life I thought I had built was a lie. I packed a single suitcase with deliberate care. Each item placed inside was a farewell to the past clothes that no longer felt like mine. Photographs frozen in time, letters never sent. It was all I could carry of a life unraveling at the seams. Before leaving, I wrote a letter, not a plea, not an explanation, but a clear statement. A final act of control in a life that had felt so out of control. The letter laid bare the truth, exposing the betrayal and the danger that lurked beneath the surface. I disabled our shared accounts, changed passwords, and severed digital ties. The phone was left disconnected, the mailbox emptied. With each step toward the door, the weight of loneliness pressed down on me, but it was lighter than the burden of staying. I did not look back. That day marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. The empty rooms echoed with the absence of a man who had never truly been there. Weeks after I left, he showed up at my door, not with apologies, but with rehearsed words designed to rewrite the narrative I had painstakingly uncovered. He portrayed himself as a victim, claiming that the shadowy dealings I discovered were forced upon him, sacrifices made to protect his family and secure our future. His voice was filled with desperation, but it was thinly veiled manipulation. He begged me to believe in him once again, to stand by his side through the storm he claimed to be weathering. But I saw the cracks in his story, the lies beneath the polished surface. I listened quietly, feeling the old wounds reopen, but no longer willing to let them define me. The man who had put me at risk, who had dragged me into a criminal underworld, was no longer the person I knew or thought I knew. When he finally left that day, I felt a cold certainty settle in. Some people never truly change. Closure rarely arrives gently. Months after our confrontation, I found myself sitting across from him in a cold, sterile mediation room. The air was thick with tension, filled with unspoken resentments and bitter memories neither of us could escape. He tried once more to justify his actions, weaving excuses and half-truths into his narrative. I responded with quiet resolve, knowing that words alone could not repair the fracture he had caused. I told him firmly that forgiveness was not something I could offer, not because I lacked compassion, but because some betrayals cut too deep to heal. There was no dramatic outburst or tearful plea, just a silent acknowledgement in his eyes that the bridge between us was irrevocably burned. As the session ended, I realized that closure isn't about reconciliation. Sometimes, it's about accepting that some chapters close with a definitive, quiet goodbye. Starting over was not easy. The weight of betrayal and loss clung to me like a shadow, but I knew that to survive, I had to reclaim my life on my own terms. I moved to a new city, one far enough to leave behind the whispers and judgments. I changed my routines, my surroundings, and even my name in some circles to protect what little peace I could carve out. The days were quieter now, but filled with a purpose that I hadn't felt in years. I began to rebuild piece by piece, focusing on myself for the first time in a long while. I sought therapy to untangle the mess of emotions, found solace in new friendships, and rediscovered passions I had long neglected. Most importantly, I learned to forgive not him, but myself, for the trust I gave too freely, for the moments I ignored my instincts, and for the courage it took to walk away. My future plan finally included me. It was a life not defined by his secrets or my past, but by the strength I found within.